Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. I am joined by Graham Frost today. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Oh, well, I'm really excited to share your heart-shaped decisions with everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to it as well.
So, a fellow podcaster, what's the name of your podcast?
My podcast is called the Heart-Shaped Decisions Podcast.
There we go. It's exactly what it is on the tin.
Yes.
Brilliant. And how long have you been podcasting now, Graham?
I guess it's coming up around about a year. Yeah.
Fantastic. And how have you found being a podcaster?
But it's really interesting. It's connected me with lots of interesting people that I may not have met otherwise. And because most of the people that I've interviewed for my podcast, with about probably 5 or 6 exceptions, I didn't know any of them before we had the interview. So I've met some really interesting people because I said that the criteria kind of worked out that it was people could be interesting, but they couldn't be famous. Although I have had 1 or 2 people that are a little bit famous.
Is that Penny Haslam?
Not yet, no. Funnily enough, not Penny yet. No, that's a good idea. I must ask her.
Because she's all about a little bit famous, isn't she?
Yes, she is, yeah.
Brilliant. I love that. So what was the reason behind not having famous people on the show?
Probably because I don't really know any, if I'm honest. No, what happened was my podcast developed, an idea occurred to me when a friend of mine asked me to be on his podcast. And I said to him afterwards, how difficult is it to record a podcast? And he said, well, if I can do it, you can do it. And so I thought, well, we'd just gone into lockdown and all my work had disappeared overnight. And so I was trying to concentrate on what I could do rather than what I couldn't do. So I thought, well, I can start a podcast and make it about heart-shaped decisions and see where we go. And I just put a call out on LinkedIn and got a few people involved and 1 or 2 people that I already knew. And, I thought I might do 10 or 12 episodes and then stop. But then I'm still doing it now a year later, and there's about 70 odd episodes recorded.
Wow. And I'm sure it will continue to be a lifelong journey because there are so many people out there who are making heart-shaped decisions.
Yes, I mean, that is true. Yeah, definitely. It's something that, I just came up with the idea of heart-shaped decisions about less than 2 years ago. In all honesty, I've been speaking about my story for quite a while. And I was doing a talk for a group of people, actually the Professional Speaking Association in London, in September 2019, I think it was. And I'd already spoken there before, and I thought, what can I give them that's new? And I was lying in bed one Sunday morning and this idea came to me about heart-shaped decisions because I realised that all the major decisions that I've ever made in my life, right up, from the age of 17 up to the present day, really, have all been heart-shaped decisions. And they're all based on feelings rather than thoughts because I feel before I think. I don't know if everybody else is like me, but, most people, I'm told that, the decision-making theory is about, thoughts leading to feelings, leading to actions. Well, that's, with me, it's generally speaking the other way around, where I go feeling, then I think thought, and then action. And sometimes not much thought goes into it at all. That's how I left home at the age of 17. If I sat down and really thought about it, going off into the big wide world on my own, cutting myself off from my family to have a different life to what they had planned for me, I probably wouldn't have done it. But because I just thought, I've got to get away, and the only thing I could think I've got to, this just doesn't feel right for me. And the big wide world out there feels much more exciting and much more, all the things that I wanted to do, to be challenged, to learn new things, to make my own choices. That was what made me make the decision. It wasn't about thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do for work? What am I going to do for money? What am I going to do for food? It was just about, the whole thing was about feelings.
And you mentioned about your family having a sort of a destiny planned for you. What was it that you needed to break away from and move out?
It was a very strict church. I talk about really strict. We didn't have radio, television, recorded music. Imagine growing up in the 1960s and you couldn't listen to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. No competitive sport. You couldn't go and watch a football match. You couldn't really support a football team. All the things that I suppose normal young lad wants to do were forbidden. And we had to go to church 4 or 5 times on a Sunday, and then every evening of the week. And the older you got, the more churches you were supposed to, the more church services you were supposed to attend. And I just thought, this is my life, in front of me. I'm going to get married to somebody from the church that I probably don't even really like, because it's, they weren't arranged marriages, but they were, there were certain people that you could marry and some that you couldn't, kind of thing. And so I just thought, this isn't for me, and started when I was about 9 years old, when I wasn't allowed to go around to somebody's house for tea after school. I was used to walk to school with a young girl from the bottom of our road, and she invited me around for tea, and I wasn't allowed to go because we weren't allowed to eat with other people that weren't in our church. So you couldn't even go out for a hamburger. In fact, one of my first acts of rebellion on my own at the age of 14 was to go to a wimpy bar and sit there and order a burger and chips and a glass of Coke or something, and sit there and eat it on my own, hoping that nobody saw me, that that was part of our church, and they didn't.
Wow, what a tough upbringing, and I mean, so different to, I would imagine, the majority of your peers.
Well, yes, I think, because I'm sure people have had worse upbringings. I've met people since, that have had worse upbringings. We always had food on the table, and I wasn't beaten, or we always had. My dad nearly always worked, and I was the oldest of 6 children, so there were certain good things about it. I always try and find the positives, but the idea of actually staying within the confines of what I was allowed to do was just didn't feel right to me from quite an early age, and so I had to leave. And leaving was it was a big. I had to just plough. When I do my talks, I talk about walking down the road from my parents' house, with both my parents walking down the road behind me, and they were both in tears. And I'd never seen my dad cry before when I was 17, and after that day, I didn't see my mum for 27 years.
Wow.
So I don't regret it.
You don't regret it? No. Okay.
No, I regret the fact that that kind of control is still in existence. There's still members of my family are still in that church.
So let's take you back to that wimpy bar. You're age 14, and you said it was your first act of rebellion. Were there more?
Well, actually, it probably wasn't my first act of rebellion, if I'm honest, because actually my first real act of rebellion was when I went to comprehensive school. I was born in Essex, and I went to a comprehensive school when I was 11 because I failed my 11 plus, which was an exam you used to take in those days to discover whether you went to a comprehensive school or a grammar school or a secondary modern or whatever they were. And excuse me. And so I went to this comprehensive school, and shock horror, when I got there were no other people from my church there, no other students from my church there. So I thought, Nobody will know what I get up to. So I made friends with another lad who lived nearby to the school, and I used to started popping around his house after school, which I wasn't supposed to do. And one day we rode our bikes into the town centre, went into Woolworths, and somehow we managed to find ourselves doing a little bit of shoplifting from Woolworths. And many people did that. I think I've got many people of my age and a little bit younger would put their hand up and say, "Yes, I did that too." Unfortunately, we got arrested. So imagine being in this strict church at the age of 11 and being arrested and taken to court. And I was actually put on probation at the age of 11. But the big thing that happened there really there was absolutely no support from me, from anybody in my family at all. Everyone just stopped talking to me. And I had 5 male cousins who lived in the same town. And I used to spend a lot of time around at their house because the next 2 members of my family down from me were sisters. So I used to go around and see my boy cousins, and spend quite a lot of time around there. And they were told, because of what I'd done, that I was a bad influence and they weren't to invite me around. So that was a big thing that happened when I was 11, yeah. And then we moved to London about a year and a half after that, and that was what really opened things up to me, because suddenly here I was going to a large comprehensive school in the East End of London, very multicultural, and I thought, this is different. I like this. I like this whole thing, because there were so many people that were different there, But whereas when I'd grown up, it was only 30 miles away, but in those days, sound like an old so-and-so, but in those days, 30 miles was quite a long way. Now it's just down the road, isn't it? But 30 miles from, London was just a completely different experience for me. And I think, I've often said that if my parents hadn't moved to London, I might not have rebelled as much as I did and gone and left, because, rebelling in Chelmsford wouldn't have been half as much fun as it was in London.
So let's take you to that moment where you are walking away from your parents and they're crying and they're behind you and you didn't see your mum for 27 years. What happened in that gap?
Oh, goodness me. Well, it would take about a week to tell the whole story. That what happened was I actually went to work in a pub in West London. And so I went, I took a few belongings with me, and I went to work in this pub. And I'd never worked in a pub before. I was only 17, so I wasn't really old enough to drink in a pub. But in those days, you could get accommodation with a job in a pub. And so I had a room upstairs, and I worked behind the bar during the day. And I'd never done it before, so I got called Speedy because I was so slow. And I wasn't very good at working behind the bar to begin with, but I got better. But it just turned out to be one of the roughest pubs in West London. It was in the middle of a massive council estate with tower blocks and all that kind of thing. And I'd never lived there, I'd never experienced anything like it. But some of the people were actually really, really nice people. They were what you would call rough diamonds, but unfortunately, some of them weren't. And I fell into bad company while I was working there. And ended up, actually leaving the pub and stealing some money and going off and making a life of petty crime for a few months, which involved me, robbing hotel rooms, for example. I'm not proud of it. I did it, I was actually used by somebody else to do all the dangerous stuff, like crawling along windowsills 4 floors up. I don't know how I ever did that, because I suffered from vertigo, but I did it because I wanted to belong. I think that a lot of young people, and maybe not quite such young people, get into bad things because they want to belong to something. And I certainly did that, and found myself actually, being arrested again. And to cut a long story short, I ended up in a young offenders institution called a Borstal. at the age of 19. And one of the officers. I mean, that was an interesting experience. I mean, I didn't see it as a completely negative experience, because I was two people in that place actually helped me. One of them was one of the officers sat down with me and said to me, he said, "Look, Frosty," he said, "you're not a criminal." He said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "We know that, some of the lads that come in here, there's not much we can do for them." He said, "But you're not like that." He said, "You've got something better about you." He said, "I don't want to see you back in here again." And another one of the officers used to let me listen to his radio in the kitchen. And I got into soul and funk music through that, and which I've been into ever since. I did a bit of DJing and that kind of thing years ago, and still love that music. So there was positives. I always try to find the positives in every situation, and there were certainly positives there. And so also I was helped massively by an Irish couple around that time, who they actually took me in off the street, because I actually ended up homeless. And at one point, just for the one night, I've done some volunteering to help homeless people over the years, and it's about the worst thing that can happen to you, not having a roof over your head. And I know I have experienced that. And this couple took me in off the street and gave me a job. And when I came out of Borstal, they took me back in, and I carried on. And they gave me a chance, and so everybody needs somebody, and they certainly made the heart-shaped decision to give me another chance. And then things improved, and I came out of Borstal, went back to work behind the bar, ended up meeting a young lady. We were quite happily together when I was about 21, 22. And I got a job on the railway, which I ended up working there for 24 years altogether. And I started to feel ill after about 6 months of working on the railway. I started to feel ill, losing weight. All sorts of things were going wrong with me. Here was me, a young, fit young man. I wasn't a fit young man anymore. And it turned out I had testicular cancer. So I had to fight that, and it's here I am. The wonders of the National Health Service. I mean, in 1979, the treatment for testicular cancer was very, very debilitating, and at one point I actually weighed 7 stone. And at the end of the chemotherapy, I had 24 mouth ulcers in my mouth. I couldn't eat or drink, and I nearly died of pleurisy. But I'm still here. And that was I won't say that it was I won't say that you can be cured of cancer through positive thinking, because there's a conversation going on about that at the minute, and I have been told off in the past for suggesting that it's possible. But I do think it helps. I do think it helps if when I was told that I had cancer, I thought, right, whatever I've got to get through, I can get through it. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel already, because I had a life that I wanted to get back to. I had somebody that I was happy with. I had a job that I was enjoying, and life was looking good. And then I was hit by this, testicular cancer, but I just focused on getting better. It took over a year of treatment, and but obviously that was over 40 years ago, and here I am, and still learning and still developing and still making heart-shaped decisions.
Wow, I mean, that's so much happened to you before you even hit 25, and now we're now over 60, and you're now able to look back at those moments, which I'm sure weren't easy. Any one of those stories that you've just shared with us, in terms of the limiting restrictions that you had as a child, and then going through to being homeless, and I know you said it was just for that one night, but it was the whole events leading up to it and around it and thereafter, it must have been a really difficult time.
It was, but I mean, I don't think I never actually gave up. I remember even with the homeless thing, people say, well, how did you only spend one night homeless? I said, because I decided that I wasn't going to have a second night of it. I thought, what can I, I thought, I woke up and I thought, well, you don't really sleep. It's on Victoria Station, and it's still very similar. Actually, the bit of Victoria Station in London that I slept on is still very similar. And I've been back there many, many times. And no, I just sort of thought, right, okay. So what can I do? And I thought, well, I can work behind the bar of a pub. So I couldn't go back to the pub I'd been at before because I'd run away from there and stolen some money. So they wouldn't have me back there. So I thought, right, well, let's find another pub that needs some staff then. And I walked down Victoria Street, and I've done that walk so many times over the years, and walked down Victoria Street. And the first pub I went into, they looked me up and down as if I was something the cat had brought in. And they said, "Oh no, we haven't got any." But turns out it's quite a posh pub with MPs go in there because it's not far from Parliament. It's called the Albert in Victoria Street. I went down a little side street. I saw another pub down there, and I walked into the pub. It was about like 10:30 in the morning. The pubs weren't even open properly, and I said, "Is the landlord around?" The landlord was an Irish guy, and he said, "Yes, I'm the landlord." He said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "I'm looking for a job." He said, "I haven't got any jobs." He said, "If you go around the corner down that little street over there," he said, "my friend John runs that pub down there." He said, "Yeah, I think he's looking for somebody." So I went down to this next pub and I walked in and I said, "Is John there?" And John was a stout chap, looked a bit like a bank manager, was dressed in a suit and tie. And I said, "Your friend from the other pub round the corner just sent me to see you." I said, "Because I'm looking for a job." And he looked me up and down. I had long hair in those days and a drooping moustache, and probably wearing platform shoes because it was the 70s. And he looked me up and down and he said, "You're looking for somewhere to live as well?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, so I'll give you." He said, "You worked behind the bar before?" I said, "Yes, I have." And he said, "Okay, so I'll give you a job. I'll give you a chance." And half an hour later, I was working behind the bar of his pub. And then when the police caught up with me a few months later for some stuff I'd done that I hadn't been dealt with, he came to court and stood up for me. And then when I was sentenced to Borstal, he actually came down to the cells and spoke to me and said, "Look," he said, "I've seen enough of you in the last 3 months," he said, "to know that you're okay." He said, "So don't worry about what," he said, "because you haven't got anybody." So I know what it's like. Turned out he'd actually grown up in an orphanage. I found out years later. And so he kept the job open for me until I came out. Heart-shaped decision.
Yeah, and it was probably other people's heart-shaped decisions that led to you just adopting that as your mantra.
Yeah, because when I look back on other people, recently, loads of people. I said there's probably about 5 people in my life that have really. So, when I worked on the railway, one of my bosses on the railway, I found out just recently that he passed away, and I had lost touch with him, unfortunately. And but I read his obituary. We got on quite well. He was one of those bosses that he never put himself above anybody else. He was the boss, but he was also part of the team, and that was how I tried to be. I eventually got my own team, and it turned out he gave me a chance one day. He said, "You're looking for a day's work," and he took me out on his train with him. He didn't need me, but he saw me standing there, and he thought, this guy needs a day's work, and because I was on standby. And I ended up working with him for 18 months. He taught me everything I know about leadership because he made a heart-shaped decision to take the. And it turned out he grew up in an orphanage as well. So he had there was something he set out to help other people.
So what's the why now? What is it you're doing? What's the plan? What's the mission?
Well, really, it's about helping young people in particular to make, to understand that the choices that they make now are going to define their lives. And because the choices I made when I was 16, 17, 18 defined my life. And, particularly the good decisions, the heart-shaped decisions that I made and some, yes, I mean, I also refer to my stupid gland, which lives in my head. Sometimes that takes over and I do stupid things. And it's just really about helping young people to make better decisions and to, show them some empathy, because I know what it was like to be a confused young person who didn't really know what he wanted. I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't know what I did want for quite a long time. And it's just about helping those young people in terms of, doing talks for them, doing mentoring, working with small groups in schools and colleges and universities and children's homes, to actually help them to understand that they are important and they can actually make decisions and they can be whoever they want to be. Because if somebody said to me 20 years ago that I'd ever be a professional speaker, I would have laughed at them.
So exactly that. Let's talk about that, about you believing that you could do it. Was it an easy transition for you to move out of the role of working in the railway to becoming a professional speaker?
Well, it was interesting because the first thing that happened was after 17 years of working on trains and serving people food and drink and leading a team of people doing that, I was offered the opportunity to go into training and development, to train other people to do what I'd been doing. And the first question I asked when I was offered that opportunity was, does that mean I've got to get up and speak in front of people? And the answer was yes, but we can give you that skill. What we can't do is duplicate the experience that you had. So I said, okay, well, I went for the job and I got it. And then I realised that I was actually quite good at training people and, being, once I got over the nerves of speaking in front of an audience, I was okay. And, I remember the first presentation I did, I was literally terrified. But then, over the period of about 7 years of training and doing all sorts of training within that industry, I got to enjoy it. It was the best job I ever had. I absolutely loved it. Some of the best work I've ever done was done in that 7 years. And then I left there, and somehow or other I heard of Toastmasters, and I went along to Toastmasters and learned to speak, and won a few speaking competitions and spoke in front of quite large audiences there. And I actually thought, I'd quite enjoy this. And then somebody said to me, you've got this rather unusual story. Have you ever thought about speaking to young people? And so I went to Milton Keynes a few years ago one day and did a talk to a group of young people in the school. There was a Young Enterprise Awards ceremony. And I did this 45 minutes, told my story, took some questions, and there was 250 teenagers and teachers there. And, I felt really good about it. And afterwards, two of the young lads came up to me in the car park afterwards and said, "Excuse me, were you the gentleman that just spoke to us?" And I said, "Yes, I was." And they said, "Well, Kevin just said you inspired us." And I remember driving home from that gig and thinking, I've actually got to do this, because I owe it to the young people of today to actually share my story with them. So that's how I got into being a professional speaker.
And that feeling of knowing that you're inspiring others was probably one of the reasons why you knew that the podcast would work as well.
Yes, I think so, yeah, because it's not so much me talking on the podcast, but all the people that I've interviewed on the podcast, without any exception, they all have some kind of inspiring story. And a lot of them don't think it is inspiring. A lot of them think, and I was talking to a guy last week and he was just telling me his story, and I was just completely gobsmacked. I said, "Wow, that is." He said, "I've had people that have come on my podcast and they've told their story. They've never told anybody before." And so that, yeah, it's a real privilege to be able to get people to talk like that.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, you know, you're using your superpower, which it is a superpower, to be able to articulate these heart-shaped decisions and how you are making these choices in life, and talking about the positive thinking. And I know that you mentioned about the issue with people saying that cancer can only be combated if you have positive thinking, because obviously that there are so many people who are positive that don't make it through. And it's not enough. It is to do with the NHS, to do with the healthcare that you're receiving. And again, there is an element of luck, you know, just making it through.
Oh God, yeah. Definitely, I was one of the lucky ones. You know, I definitely. I mean, there was a chap in the next bed to me. You know, for about the first 3 courses of treatment, he decided that he couldn't take any more of the treatment. He took his girlfriend on holiday, and the next time I went back, you know, I went back to my next course of treatment. He wasn't there. I went back to the next one. He wasn't there. And I said to the nurses, "Have you heard from him?" And they said, "Well, you know, really sorry to have to tell you he's actually passed away." Because he didn't keep up with. We were told, you know, if you don't keep up with the treatment, then, you know, we can't actually guarantee that anything if you don't go through with the treatment. So, despite the fact that it made you feel, you know, I've never felt so bad as that treatment made me feel in my life ever. You know, you literally didn't want to do anything for the 3 weeks in between courses of treatment. I used to sit on the sofa at home and watch cricket on the telly. That's how I got into watching cricket, which is one of my great loves, you know. So there's always a positive to be found somewhere, you know.
So let's ask you the question about the reunion with your mother. It must have been an emotional one.
Yes, well, it was funny. Well, funny is maybe not the right word, but in 1999, I think it was, I decided I was going to go and you know, seek my parents out. I knew where they'd moved house, but I knew where they lived. I turned up outside my parents' house, and was trying. You know, can you imagine a guy in his 40s actually not being able to pluck up the courage to go and knock on their parents' door? You know, I mean that's where I've got to. And so anyway, I thought, well, I'm going to walk around the block, and then I get back, I'm going to go and knock on the door. When I got back, there they were on the doorstep with one of my sisters and 2 children. So they were already out of the house. So I just walked up, and my mother didn't recognise me because I'd lost my hair. You know, by that time I more or less had as much hair as I've got now, which is virtually none. And of course, she'd known me when I was 17. I looked completely different. My dad recognised me because he'd seen me a few times a few years earlier. He'd come out in search of me to try and persuade me to go back a couple of times. Mum didn't know who I was. But then, the great thing was that in 2001, they actually rang me, and they said, my dad rang me and said, "We'd like you to come and see us." So I went to see them. And ever since, my mother passed away in 2017. She was nearly 86, and she was very poorly. But I was actually able to see her a few days before she died. And I went to her funeral, which wouldn't, that wouldn't have happened. And I still keep. I haven't been able to go and see my dad for the last year or more because of COVID. He's in a care home in Scotland, and he's 90, and he's got dementia. But I write to him every month, and I know that he keeps the letters because whenever I go and see him, he might not remember a telephone conversation, but he can pick up a letter and read it again. So I know that he reads my letters because they're on his table when I go and see him.
So the message I'm hearing today is that you learnt to speak, as in you found your voice.
Yes.
And you were then able to help others and help the young to find their voice and stand up for what they want and make those heart-shaped decisions.
That's right.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to hear your story and to share it with the audience. It's been an incredible journey that you've been on. And yes, the positive thinking power that you have there has kept you through. But like you said, you see the positive sides, but you also see how the difficult moments have benefited you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, so that there's no gain without pain, but it is to a certain extent true.
Yeah, I'm not sure that going through testicular cancer needed you to teach that lesson.
No, I wouldn't recommend that. No, that's something. I think nowadays the treatment for cancer has come on in leaps and bounds, and I've had friends who've had chemotherapy and one thing and another recently. I mean, it's still bad. It still has an adverse effect on you as well as a positive effect, but it's not like it was in the 1970s and early 80s. They have made it much more humane, but I'm still here to tell that tale. So.
And I'm sure there's many reasons why you are. So again, I want to say thank you so much, Graham. How would people get in contact with you?
The best way to find me, I'm quite active on LinkedIn. If you look up Graham Frost on LinkedIn, my podcast is Graham Frost's Heart-Shaped Decisions. You can find that on all the usual platforms. I've got a website, grahamfrost.com, or you can email me, graham@grahamfrost.com.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure all of those links are available in the show notes. So thank you for that. Again, thank you so much, Graham, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have you got some final words for the audience, please?
Yes, I have. I think, it's just about, whoever's listening to this, if you take one thing only away from this podcast, is to use your heart a little bit more in your decisions. Think about how you feel, or maybe, make it about how you feel, not about how you think all the time, because you will make some much more interesting decisions. And I've had an interesting life. I'm continuing to have an interesting life. And I'm sure the reason for that is because I make heart-shaped decisions.
Thank you for listening to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star Apple Podcast review. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook, and become a member of my inspiring, uplifting and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. I help people to focus on their why with clarity, uniting their passion with their purpose with a plan, to create the life they truly desire. If you would like me to help you focus on your why, then please book a free 20-minute coaching call via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Friday Focus weekly newsletter via my website, amyrowlandson.com. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.